but the marking absolutely floored me. I was one of the I had the dubious honor of training during COVID. And so what happened was that in my second placement, which is the one where you learn all about the marking and moderating and the long-term and medium-term planning, that was cut short 2 weeks in, and we were gone. We were sent home with no further communication from the school.
Hello, my name's Jenna. I'm an online primary tutor, and today I'm talking to Vivienne about how to quit teaching and become a tutor and a one-to-one English teacher. If you are a new tutor just starting out, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you very much for joining me today, Vivienne.
Oh, hi there, Jenna. Really nice to meet you, virtually
Lovely.
at least, anyway.
Well, we got in touch on Facebook and you very kindly agreed to chat to me and share your story. So I'm really looking forward to hearing all about it. So can you tell me, why originally did you want to go into teaching?
Well, it's one of those, I was probably a very late starter as a teacher, and yet all of my career I'd been doing teaching or training type roles. And I got to the point just before the pandemic, actually, where I thought, no, it's time to do a proper job. I'd done teaching English as a foreign language. I'd had my own language school. I found that exhausting, but fun. But by the time you'd done all the activities and the hosting and everything else, there wasn't really a lot of money left in the pot. I'd done a lot of training of adults. I'd run a networking group and did a lot of training on public speaking. And I've always been a natural teacher. I'm sure you recognize that, because I think most teachers I've spoken to, some of them tell stories about lining their teddies up and sort of, I never did that. But I really enjoy giving people confidence. I think that was the angle I came at it. And because I'd taught art as a sort of unofficial teacher in my son's primary school and loved it, because my original degree was art. And because I had taught English for over 10 years as as a TEFL teacher or TESOL teacher, I thought the obvious route then was to go into teaching. And for me, it was also partly financial security. I mean, you'll probably laugh hearing that, because it's not exactly as if teachers are very well paid. But for me, the security of being paid through the summer months, for instance, or, because teaching is very seasonal if you're not working in the mainstream, really appealed to me. But it was tough. I had to go back to uni, as a 50-year-old. And I realized that was much tougher than I thought, romantically thought it was going to be. In fact, I started uni at the same time as my younger son. So we had a lot of laughs about that. So I went back and did my PGCE then.
So before we go on to that then, that's really interesting about the TEFL role and your school. Was that online or was that in person?
I taught online and in person. I loved the online. I used to teach business English, or sort of conversation really, to Spanish business people. I really enjoyed that. I worked for a Chinese company, and sometimes I was teaching children as young as 3. I mean, they really do start early with the
China, really.
Yeah.
I've worked with these children.
I found that quite brutal, actually, the teaching for the company in Beijing, because they were, there was often an internet problem, and if your internet went down or got cut off or whatever, they would automatically fire you. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. You kept being taken off the roll, then have to write to them again. They'd reinstate you, and the stress was unbelievable. So I found it very interesting, particularly hearing a little bit more about life in China. There were lots of rules about what you couldn't talk about, funnily enough, but sometimes I got glimpses of daily life and kind of obligations and family sort of dynamics and stuff, and I found that fascinating. I've always found other cultures fascinating. I was born in Kenya. I grew up in Nairobi, and I think that being able to communicate and teach people how to communicate, particularly if they're from a different culture, have a different language, is just the best thing. It's so exciting.
Oh, wow. And what was your education like growing up then? What were the expectations like over there?
So for me, there was always an expectation that I would come back to England and go to boarding school, because beyond secondary, I think the options were quite limited. So I did the 11 plus and came back and went to boarding school. And you can imagine that comes with its own challenges. You're terribly homesick to begin with, and but at the same time, you make really, really good friends, and you have the fantastic benefit, for me, of getting on a plane and stepping into this warm bath that is the lovely weather out there. And it was a complete break. So what I also found was that we had like sort of exeats, like weekends out. We could go, and I'd go and stay with my big sister in London and have a great time. So it was a different way to grow up. I certainly could never have sent my children to boarding school, but that was the expectation from my parents. We want you to get this kind of education. We're prepared to put a lot of money into it, but it'll be tough. My dad was a civil servant, so it wasn't exactly, I think it must have been a struggle for them. But I think what it taught me is to be resilient and to be quite adaptable, and that has really helped me in my career, because I've had an interesting career and lots of different twists and turns. Excuse me. And I think that's, funny enough, that's really helped me.
Wow, you've had such an interesting education career before even starting teaching.
My impression was that, having come into teaching from, I'd worked in business, I'd worked with lots of business women, particularly because my networking group was for business women. And having, done the art, I used to do illustration commissions, and having done the TESOL teaching, that I'd actually have a lot of real life experience and kind of wisdom to offer my students. That was my idealistic view anyway. And I think, when I interviewed with schools, that was what I sold. I said, well, I didn't do a degree in English literature, but I am very strong on the grammar side of it. And I have, a lot of life experience, and certainly lots of experience teaching children of all nationalities in all different settings. Sometimes it would be a really big group, sometimes really small group, sometimes one-to-one. And I think what helped me with that, the fear of stepping into the classroom, was that I'd done it so many times before. I really liked being in the classroom, so it didn't, I wasn't kind of awed by that, or overawed by that, maybe.
Yeah, because often, kind of when I was younger growing up, it was expected that you went to school. I had quite an average, stepping stones in life, school, university, straight into the world of work. And it's quite overwhelming when you're quite young to then be faced with 30 plus children
Absolutely.
and
And I
manage
think,
their
yeah,
emotions.
it is. And I think it's hard to explain to people outside of teaching how scary that can be. I mean, having dealt with lots of teenagers, because my sons are in their 20s now, but that also helped, because for me, it was nothing I hadn't seen before, if that makes sense. I mean, some of the behavior I definitely hadn't seen before. It was quite a shock. But secondary is, I think, I hope anyway, quite different from primary in that respect. I possibly should have gone into primary teaching, because I love teaching small children, and because I'm also very autistic. I did my in the PGC, you've got to do your primary placement, and I had a day with a primary where I was just sitting painting, and all the children were coming up and giving me their woodland creatures that they'd chosen for this big collage we were doing on the wall. And I was just in heaven. I was thinking, what have I done? I'm not going to be able to use my art. But I was actually worried about having to teach maths, which is not a strong subject for me. And it's silly, really, because I'm sure I could have mastered primary maths. I'm sure I could have done. I got my numeracy professional skills. Okay, so I that possibly would have been. But it's so hard to choose, isn't it? It's really difficult to make all these choices and know whether you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. So then, focusing on secondary, for anyone that doesn't know, what is a secondary English teacher? What does that involve?
So for me, I never got to teaching A level. It tends to be the very experienced teachers that get the A level gig. And of course, that's lovely because you're teaching children who've chosen to specialize in literature or language. And you know, you don't have any of them, oh, why do we have to do this? It's really boring. You know? So it's teaching children from year 7 up to year 11. So taking them, for me, it was taking them up to their GCSEs. And you'd usually have, you know, range of different groups. So year 7s were always my favorite because they still wanted to impress you, you know, and they were still quite happy to confide in you. And they were just really cute. Other teachers I knew found them really annoying because they were so needy, you know, but I loved them. I really did. And then no, year 11, you've got the stress of trying to, you know, provide, you know, enough resources for them to pass their exams, and also try to motivate the ones who really, really have opted out, you know, with all the kind of attendant behavior that entails. So really fascinating in terms of you're really teaching students how to craft their language. You can, what I really loved was listening to their opinions, because I think young people have such brilliant, you know, refreshing views on things. And I loved sort of educating them a little bit about the broad spectrum of, say, politics. You know, we were studying Blood Brothers, for instance, and talking about, you know, Britain under Thatcher and that kind of thing, without giving an agenda, because that's, of course, as a teacher, you're not supposed to do that, but giving them a little bit more knowledge, because I think in terms of cultural capital and perhaps political awareness, there's a really big role that we can play in helping children to kind of navigate the world and become critical thinkers. And so from that point of view, it was really great. And having discussions about, you know, some of the really huge topics that are covered in literature, of course, you know, things like integrity and, you know, and looking at character development and that kind of thing. So I suppose for me as an English teacher, you know, that was lovely. I used to love those lessons where I'd be challenging their beliefs perhaps, and kind of empowering them to perhaps develop their understanding of the world outside. Because I think as a teacher, one of your biggest roles is preparing them to be fantastic citizens once they've left school, you know, and to communicate, to have good relationships, and all of those things that are encompassed in being able to express yourself, you know, very eloquently.
And in terms of the admin side of the role, in terms of marking, let's say, English. Oh,
English is, I think, the worst. I think history can be pretty tough too, but the marking absolutely floored me. I was one of the, well, I had the dubious honor of training during COVID. And so what happened was that in my second placement, which is the one where you learn all about the marking and moderating and the long-term and medium-term planning, that was cut short 2 weeks in, and we were gone. We were sent home with no further communication from the school. So the uni was still in touch, and they were encouraging us to read widely, and we had to finish the rest of our degree from home. But you know what COVID was like. It was very hard to really focus on anything. It was such a strange time, wasn't it? So I never really got confident enough with my marking. Ironically, I think my marking was quite accurate, but I always felt I always gave too much feedback because I so wanted to help them, you know, and I gave too much. And students don't really read feedback anyway, so that it was completely pointless. And I struggled with the, you know, with the volume, because in a lot of departments, certainly the last school I taught at, it would just get divvied up. So if there was mocks, you know, you just get an allocation, even if, you know, you weren't actually teaching year 11 at that stage. Here are your papers, you know, you've got to do those. And the turnaround was always really, really short. And I would be, honestly, I would be up till 1 or 2 in the morning sometimes, and then getting up at 6 again. And I was so tired and so fragile, you know. And I think there are so many teachers, particularly new teachers, who are literally on the verge of, complete breakdown because they're done. They're exhausted,
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, with things like marking, you only get better by experience, really. So you can certainly seek some advice, but no one's really got time to help you. And if they do, it's very much on the understanding of, right, now you get on with it because I've got my own stuff to deal with. So I never really gained confidence in the marking. Ironically, now I do mark practice papers for my students and I quite enjoy it. But that's because I'm only marking, the odd individual paper, rather than having, I don't know, 20, 25 to mark and there's a deadline and, whatever you were doing. I think that used to upset me, whatever you were doing. So maybe the year eights had done a really fantastic project that I was trying to mark. And then mocks would come in, and then I'd have to put that to one side. And then you'd have students waiting like a whole term for some of their marks because other things had taken precedence. And I think that used to really upset me because it felt like I was letting the younger students down, because schools tend to concentrate, obviously, as you get closer to GCSEs or A levels, they concentrate more on those students because it's a crucial time for them. And I suppose technically they need the feedback, they need the consistency. But, there's that awful kind of juggling act where you've never finished, you never feel that you've done enough. And you've got that horrible sense of guilt, that Sunday afternoon guilt where you think, oh, I haven't done enough work this weekend. I actually went out with my friends, yesterday. I shouldn't have done that. I should have stayed at home.
It's next level. I remember being with family on a Sunday in one particular school, and the level of panic I felt all afternoon. I was like, right, I've got to sit and enjoy myself. I've got to sit and enjoy myself.
Yes, exactly.
Like a ticking bomb
Yep.
going off in my head. And I ended up just bursting out crying because I was that overwhelmed and that stressed.
Yes.
And family started to click, oh, something's, and this was primary. But
yeah,
one thing I have.
But primary, you have to mark a lot, don't you? Don't you have to mark every day?
Yes, it depends on the age group. So I was early years, and you wouldn't think you'd have a lot of marking in early years, but it depends on the school. It depends on the marking policy. And I do things like TikTok and things. And one of the things I always say, before you go to any school, check the marking policy. Because even when they say, oh, it's really good, really good work-life balance. I was in schools that had 4-way marking policies per lesson. So one group would have to do self-marking, one group would have to do peer marking, one group would have to do in-depth marking.
Yeah.
And trying to manage all those plates every lesson.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I just think, oh, like marking is like unspoken about. But when then did you do planning? Like when did you have for that?
It was interesting when I was interviewing people for the book. I mean, one of the teachers was telling me that, in France, for instance, they have so many hours to actually plan. They don't have as many contact hours as we do, and therefore they actually expect you to have time within your job to plan your lessons, because there is no planning time. We used to have, our free periods, but they would generally be taken for cover. So you'd just be thinking, oh, good, I've got that, that hour, whatever. And then it'd be like, oh, sorry, no, you've got to go and cover this science lesson or Spanish lesson or whatever. And you would just, planning was in your own time, marking was in your own time. And I looked at my more experienced colleagues. I always tried to learn from other teachers. And the ones that were very good, they marked. As soon as they got there in the morning, they were marking. If they weren't a tutor, they were marking all the way through tutor time. Then they would be marking at lunchtime. Then they would be, do you know what I mean? They just worked the whole time. But even then, they were still working in the evenings and working at weekends. And I was looking at them thinking, I remember one of them told me, well, don't worry, because you'll get the hang of it by about year 4 or year 5.
Oh.
And I was thinking, I don't want to wait that long. I'm sorry. I don't want to wait that long before I feel comfortable and before I feel able to manage the job. I understand that the longer you go in the longer you hang around, you build a bank of resources. And because in our school, the curriculum didn't change that much, you would have, a whole text that you taught before. And so you can but each class is different, so obviously you have to make adjustments for that. But it just seemed like an impossible task to me. That what upset me, I think, was I wanted to do things properly, and I never felt I had enough time or enough knowledge or enough help to do that. You know, you're always on the back foot. You're always kind of trying to catch up. And then, of course, you've got parents as well. So if students aren't doing well, particularly in secondary, I had a wonderful top set. I absolutely adored those lessons. It was just such a treat to go and teach them, and I taught them for 2 years. I stayed longer really to take them through as far as I could, before their GCSEs. But even with them, one of the parents, I think I'd not marked soon enough. I'd not marked because we had to do 3 assessments per unit, which is a lot. And I hadn't marked soon enough or hadn't shown them results or whatever. So the parents, 3 of the parents decided that the students weren't making enough progress. So they put a complaint in about me. And I had to have an observation lesson where in the middle of the lesson, they gave the students a feedback form to fill in about me. So as I was teaching and wandering around the room, I was trying not to read over their shoulder as they were feeding back about me. And, something like that, in the end, when I got all the feedback forms back, I just did a lesson on it. I said, thanks very much for your feedback. Obviously, it's all anonymous. So, really good to get that. And I explained some of the things that they weren't happy with. Why are we spending so long on this text? Well, because that's department policy. Why do we have so long silent reading at the beginning of the lesson? Because that's department policy. And once I'd explained it a bit better, everything settled down and we went back to working as we were before. And I told them that they were doing really, really well. And after that, I learned my lesson and kept the marks coming in, so that anyone at home could see what they were doing. But that was really just a planning error on my part, I think. I hadn't done a big assessment to begin with to show parents what they'd learned. But it's very unforgiving, and the stress of thinking, oh my God, I'm not doing the right thing by them, whatever. And that was a top set. But top sets expect a lot, the children are expected to do well. So the children and the parents have high expectations, as do the school. How are they doing? Let's check that you're stretching them enough and challenging them enough, and that they're making enough progress.
It used to be the way though that staff did feel supported, but now it seems to be a catch you out method. And like you said, all those instead of, because in my experience, everything's going into academies, and the leadership in the academies I worked in didn't have a clue about their staff. They'd walk into classrooms, they didn't even know their first names. And I witnessed that. I did permanent and supply, and on supply, it was really awkward because like the head would come in and she'd call staff by the wrong names. And they were like, and they got to the point where they were just like, try that again. That's not my name. And so they didn't know their staff. And then that's why they have to do all these measures, because they don't know what their staff are doing. They don't know what's going on in the classroom. And then again, it creates that mistrust with the teacher, because it's like, well, if you knew me, you would know the level of work that I am doing on a daily basis. And rather than doing all this, just go to them and say, okay, what's happened? Okay, right, I'll go and talk to the parents about that and tell them why. It's an interesting...
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I think we had, my last school, we had a wonderful senior leadership team. And I did feel that they, obviously having interviewed me, I did feel that they had taken my measure and they knew that I was very passionate about the students. And, and so I can't really say that there was lack of support from the senior leadership at all.
That's good.
But I did feel that I would have liked a little bit more. I came before they moved it to early career teacher, didn't they? So you had a slightly different system. And I think they now have, new teachers have a longer period of support.
Yes, 2 years
we
now.
did. Yeah. for me, I would have done better with 2 years of support. I think I really, really would have loved to have had a mentor just to discuss things like that with. And, you know, I think everyone's different, but for me, I need some encouragement. I really need to be told, you're doing a good job, don't worry, I liked what you did there, you know, what are your issues? I didn't really get a chance, other than of my own making, to have those discussions. It was very much, it was nice in a way because we had a lot of autonomy, but it felt a little bit like you're on your own, kid, you know, just get on with it. And so, and maybe that's coming into teaching a bit later as well, because of course, if you look at me, I mean, one of my sons said to me, he was trying to cheer me up. He said, when I was training, he said, well, don't worry, Mum. No one will know you're a new teacher because you look like you've been around a long time. Thanks, son. And I know what he meant, but actually, I think then probably that there was that assumption. And actually, you know, I was just a new teacher. I really, you know, didn't know a lot of the time what I should be doing. So you've got to try and kind of brazen it out, I suppose, you know, and hope that you're doing a good job. And once I, you know, on my last day, it was quite ironic really, because on my last day I got this, you know, I spent most of the day in tears because I had such overwhelming feedback about, you know, how much the students were going to miss me, and you know, how my passion for my students was obvious, and you know, and this, that, and the other. And I do remember thinking there's a little bit of me that felt like I wish you could have told me at the time, because that would have been really helpful, you know. But yeah, I think definitely, you know, people don't have time. That's the thing. In this, you know, in this sort of era of teaching, people really don't have the time to be as kind as maybe they would like to be. And that is just one of the features, I suppose. For me, I got to the point where I felt, not that I wanted to give up teaching really, it was just that I had given up my whole life to try and survive and do the, you know, I almost felt like I would have to be a different person in order to be very successful in this career that I'd chosen, you know, fairly late on, if you like. And I wasn't prepared to do that. I do think the older you get, the more important you feel that the life balance is. And, you know, I had an elderly mother I was helping to, I am still helping to care for, who's, you know, who's very frail. And I had twin grandchildren. And I kind of thought, no, the struggle isn't worth the prize. Does that make sense? You know, as much as I love teaching, it didn't feel like it was a very healthy life for me, you know, because I was so stressed all the time. And I'm a very cheerful person, you know, and I'm quite calm and positive and whatever. And I felt that I wasn't being me. It was putting me in a different, you know, sometimes quite a hostile environment. And it's not good. It's not good for you. I mean, I don't know about you, but you know, there are days, aren't there, where you just think this is like a nightmare, and other days where it's wonderful. You know, you felt you've really made a difference and you've really helped. But there were other days where it felt like a battleground, and you know.
I think when you're sitting there at night, I remember I used to be sitting there at like 10 o'clock at night working at the dinner table while my family are sitting on the sofa, and I would sit in the living room so that I was at least.
So at least you were, yes, I know what you mean, actually, yeah.
And then you get to a point and you think, is this worth it? Because then I'll be awake at 2 a.m. fretting about what I've got to do, and then you couldn't sleep, and then you'd be up anyway, and then you go in early, and then the days just went like that because everyone's running around and like when you say with, you know, because back in the day I went into schools and the support was there. You know, if you didn't know something, you could go to someone, you could ask them, you could talk to them about it, and it wasn't seen as you can't do it. Whereas the years progressed in my experience, and you'd go to a new school, and I was early years trained, went to different year groups. oh, but you're an experienced teacher, you should know about this curriculum. I'm like, well, yes, I know about early years curriculum because I was trained in that. I've done that for so many years, but now I'm in a new year group, new expectations, new curriculum, new resources, and no one
And it's new all the time, isn't it?
day.
You've got to keep updating your knowledge and your skills. Yeah.
And then they seem to do the support after you suddenly say, I don't have a clue what I'm doing. I'm going with what people have given me, like their copies of planning, and they're like, oh, that's right. And you think, well, you haven't shown me any other way, so I'm doing the best that I can. So then when did you officially leave, and were the school, you said the children were upset, but were the leadership surprised?
Well, I think what I'd done was I had asked to go, this is about a year ago. So I've done a full year of tutoring and other things now. Yes, they're quite fresh. I was thinking actually, well, this morning I was thinking about it. I think it seemed longer than a year. It feels like a long time ago now because life's just moved on, you know. They weren't surprised because I had asked to go part-time because I'd got so stressed with I'd be doing like a weekend looking after my mum, 1 weekend a month, and then going to see her every weekend anyway, but doing actually 1 weekend of care. And I'd just become more and more stressed. And I thought, well, maybe the answer is to go part-time. So the deputy head, who I spoke to, was just fantastic. And he said, absolutely, we want to support you. We wouldn't want to lose you. I always felt that he was quite a champion of mine, and he was very understanding. And so they let me do that. And they also allowed me, it worked out so that I could still support my top set because they were the ones closest to GCSE. And I got to keep my favorite classes, actually, although you're not allowed to have favorites. And then I was sharing some classes with a colleague. And that worked reasonably well. But I discovered, as I think a lot of people discover when they go part-time in teaching, is that you're just doing probably the same amount of work, but this time you're not being paid as much. And that didn't really work in terms of easing the stress. I did really enjoy having a day off, but of course, I spent most of it working. So it possibly helped me manage some of the planning and marking better, but I wasn't getting the day off that I actually really needed, if that makes sense. I really needed just a day off where I did something totally different, I think, for my own well-being. And that didn't really work. So I was told by the headmaster, I called into the office as it came time to, because what they'd done is they'd then put me onto a different contract because I'd gone part-time. And the time came for the contract to be renewed. And I was told by the headmaster, well, we're expecting you to come back full-time in September. It's not a possibility to carry on being part-time. And although that could have made me feel that was really unfair, actually it was quite a relief because I think I'd really decided that I wanted to leave by then anyway. So it made the whole situation much easier. Because as you know, in teaching, if you have intentions to leave, you actually can't share them with anybody.
Nope.
Because then you'll
a lot around you.
Yeah, you will be treated completely differently, because you're the traitor that's jumping ship or whatever. And for me, it made it much easier because it was kind of taken out of my hands, if that makes sense. I didn't feel I could go back to going full-time. I just didn't feel that was the right move for me. And so that kind of forced me into developing other plans and exploring other options. So actually that was quite nice. I mean, it was it made it easier for everyone, I think. And so that's what happened. And I was so ready to go once I reached that point. Yes, it was sad saying goodbye. And as I said, the card, in fact, the card from my colleagues was the one where I thought, oh, I wish I'd known all this, unless they were just being kind, I'm not sure. But I left hadn't burnt any bridges. I left in, you know, in a good, it was the nicest way to leave, if that makes sense. I didn't leave in a, you know, blaze of sour grapes or anything, because I'm very wholehearted about things. I really had put a lot into the job, and there were many aspects of it I loved. It was a very diverse school, very inclusive. It was a faith school. I'm not a Catholic, but it was a Catholic school, and I was so impressed at their ethos, particularly fundraising and that kind of whole sense of community. There were lots of aspects I really, really loved. I had just reached the point where, as I said, it just didn't feel like I was being me. I also feel it's difficult for other people, to your colleagues, to get to know you, because there's never time.
People do care about others, but they're so busy, they just don't have the time to tell you.
No,
Suddenly,
I mean,
like, yeah,
that's
you're
right.
going, right, let's tell her, finally, we can finally get it off.
One of the teachers I interviewed said that they don't have the bandwidth, and I think that's quite true, actually. It's sad, and it's a shame, and it's a lesson to be learned, I think, because I certainly, I think if you can support colleagues, I think that's as important as supporting your students, because there'll be lots of people around who really, really need that kind word or that bit of help, or an offer to come and observe, or that, or perhaps, you could sit in on the lesson or whatever. All those things that we were taught when doing our PGCE that would be very valuable, that still applies, I think. And I think as an early career teacher, or when you just join somewhere, you really do need that kind of bolstering up, because it's tough. It's a tough job, isn't it? It's very rewarding, but it's very tough.
Very tough. So then how did you hear about tutoring? Did you take a little break first after you originally?
No, I didn't actually. What happened was I had one of my very lively year 8 classes, one of the students who was quite severely on the autistic spectrum. He was supported by an ABA tutor. I don't know if you've come across
I've
them.
heard of them. Yes, I think
Yeah.
I'm part of a group of ABA tutors, possibly.
Yeah. So it's advanced behaviour analysis, and contrary to what I think it started as, which was almost curing people of autism, which obviously is not something that we would espouse or whatever. But what it is really is being an advocate for that student, and you come in and you help them with particular targets. They might be social, or they might be academic, or whatever. So there was an ABA tutor who used to sit in on the class, and I got to know, and then they changed every now and again, and I got to know them quite well. And when I said that I was leaving, one of the tutors said to me, do you know what, you really ought to talk to my supervisor, because they'll snap you up. I mean, you're great with the kids, and you're a teacher already. And ABA is different because you're not an academic teacher, but it really helps if you are. So I actually went straight into doing a bit of that, and I worked with a lovely boy who was in primary school, actually, so I got my fix of primary in the end. And I used to go in 2 days a week, I think 2 mornings a week, and support him, and I loved it. Quite challenging, obviously, because you have to work out what the triggers are. If there's an episode, you have to work out what triggered it, what really triggered it, and then work on how to learn from that, and help the child kind of develop and maybe learn strategy to deal with that situation if it occurs again. So I did some ABA tutoring, and then I just put up an ad. I knew from other people, English tuition particularly was always very sought after. There are always kids who will need, English and maths at least. And so I just decided I would advertise. I was told about a tutor site, and I put up an advert, and it's amazing how quickly it grew, actually. So I also had to decide and be quite firm with myself how long I would work, because when you're tutoring, I'm sure you find that you could literally fill up every evening if you wanted to, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to go from being tired and stressed to another way of being tired and stressed. Although the pressure's off, I can't tell you how much better I feel in myself. I don't wake up with that sense of dread. It's like a huge burden's been lifted. Now I'm working for myself, and doing what I'm doing and working one-to-one especially. But it grows very quickly because it's word of mouth, isn't it? And then I'm, obviously GCSE results have just come out, and it's been so heartwarming. I've had lovely, all of my GCSE students passed, and there's a pair of students who used to come to me. I got them in the middle of year 11, so I only had a few months to work with them, and they went up 3 grades. And their mum has written me this brilliant testimonial, and then you think, oh, well, I am doing the right thing then, because I still love teaching. I love supporting young people. I love creating the rapport. I love doing all that. But I think tutoring builds so fast, you really don't have to worry about it. It will just happen. You need to be advertising in the right place. And then it just happens, and you, every time because occasionally I've sort of let a student go, as it were. Occasionally I've said, I don't think I'm the right person to help you. But I've found every time I do that, it's quite difficult doing it, but every time I do that, someone else will bring up. It's quite extraordinary. It's like a sort of cycle. So I don't know whether you have the same experience, but and then I gave a talk. I went to a business networking meeting because I used to do a lot of that. And I gave a talk about my kind of journey from, what I started off doing and my art and all the rest of it, and all through to teaching. And my fellow speaker, there were 3 of us, my fellow speaker said, I want to put you in touch with this fantastic woman. And her name is Kat Perry, and she runs an alternative learning provision centre just down the road from me.
Oh, okay.
And that's how I got into alternative learning centre teaching. It was literally a personal recommendation. I didn't know much about it. I went along and met her, and she's just such an inspiring woman. And then, so that another part of my work is working there. So still working one-to-one, but working within that centre. And these children they are unable to, they don't fit into mainstream teaching. So it might be through high anxiety. I'm quite good with the very anxious female students who are usually wonderful at creative writing and really very thoughtful, and their English skills are often, there's so much potential there, but they find, for whatever reason, the school setting just too stressful. So they're either partially out of school or maybe completely out of school, and maybe looking to move on to a special school that will will accommodate their needs, or working with children who are quite high on the ASD scale. And again, it's fascinating because a lot of those behavior issues that you get in a large classroom, we just don't get them at all working one-to-one. We just don't get them, because what we do, we talk to the children about, and their parents about, what do you need? How do you work best? Whatever. There are days when they're just not up to it, and they can ring up and say, sorry, so-and-so won't be coming in today because they're having a really bad day. They've had a bit of a meltdown, whatever. But funnily enough, and I think that's what, when I interviewed her, the director of this centre, she said, you would have thought from the kind of spiky profiles that most of them have, that you would have lots of behaviour issues, and they are so minimal because they feel understood. You're not telling them what to do. It's not as dictatorial. It's like a one-to-one conversation, and you're there to help them, and they feel it's more relaxed. It's much more informal. They call us by our first names, and that's absolutely fine. So you develop this relationship with the student where they feel like you're on their side. And so the behavior issues just disappear. It's just incredible.
And what do these settings look like in comparison? Because I imagine a school setting or a similar setting to a school would be quite triggering for some children.
Oh yeah, they're completely different. So this centre, it's really nice. As soon as you walk in there, you think, oh, this is lovely. It's quite busy because a lot of these students need kind of quiet space and whatever, but they seem to be able to manage. It's basically not lots of little cubicle rooms. They've divided the different spaces with screens, so it's still got that open plan kind of feel. Lots of bright colours everywhere. There's one room I often work in called the sensory room, where, I mean, I don't like working in that room because I'm down in an armchair, kind of balancing my laptop, and then they're up on you know, at a desk, sitting at a desk. But some kids, I have taught kids who wanted to be wrapped up in a blanket whilst we did the lesson. It's fine by me. I really don't mind, you know. So they're just like little spaces, a little bit like an open plan office, I suppose. But everyone's so friendly. And then what I really like is that the other teachers are great, and they sometimes their students will come up and say, oh, do you want to play bananagram? Because we finished our lesson early. And so you get this lovely community amongst the students, some of whom are really quite uncomfortable in social situations, but somehow it's okay because they're in that setting. You know, so you get this great feeling of you know, it's not always easy working with any child, is it? But it's the most conducive, I suppose, because we're not trying to put them into groups. Apparently they tried that. They tried small groups, and it just didn't really work. They're just much happier, most of these students, working on their own. And then because they've become an exam centre as well, it does mean that they are able to go through and take their exams. And sometimes it's just an aspect of the exam. So I mainly teach English language now because that's the one that you need to pass in order to go on and do A-level, do other things. So I specialize in English language, and you know, I mainly teach AQA, but they can act as an exam centre for whatever exam, you know, that the children need or want. And I think they've been pretty successful, actually. That, you know, this is the first year that they've been offering exam, you know, the exam facility, if you like. And for some children, they just want to take maybe a couple or whatever. If they've been out of school refuses for a long time, it might be that they just decide to take 3, or they take a longer period of time to do something. So many of these students are really intelligent and really, really able. You know, it's just finding a situation and a setting where they feel at ease and they can show what they're capable of.
And what's the admin side like in this kind of role?
Fabulous. I mean, really, it's a very you have a lot of autonomy. Actually, you're normally working on building a curriculum for the student based on their interests. So I have one student who loves birds of prey, so it's quite specific, and he loves birds in general, but birds of prey in particular. And so it was up to me how I got him back into English. And what I did was I chose to teach him a Kestrel for a Knave as our first text. And of course, it was great because it led on to him doing a project himself about birding. And, you know, this is a student who'd refused to write anything. And every lesson, at the end of the lesson, I had said, right, come on, it's time for you to carry on with your writing. And there he was, you know, tapping away at the computer. And we've had a great time learning it. Now he's ready to go on to the proper syllabus, but I'll still be able to choose what I teach him in order to prepare him for the exams. And I know already that there's a text, I think it's from Wolf Hall, about falcons, and I can use that as one of my ways in, because I think taking the time to do that and tailor it, you know, some students are into sport or history or gaming or whatever it is, it means that they actually really enjoy the learning as well as you teaching them the right skills. So I like that, because you can be really creative and think, aha, I know a way in with you. This is what we're going to do, you know, which I love. And you don't have the freedom to do that generally if you work in a school, because there are set texts, aren't there? So
when you said about the child wearing a blanket and stuff, like, I am quite flexible in my tutoring, so it sounds very similar to what I do. You know, there's a difference between a child being relaxed and being comfortable with the teaching and being a bit silly. So you know, as a teacher, what the difference is.
Absolutely,
yeah. At what point the lesson is not going in the right direction.
Yeah.
It's just having that freedom to adapt. Like, I don't, like, if a child's eating or something like that and it's not distracting the lesson, fine, no problem. I'm not like, it's not a school setting. Whereas when I
No.
started tutoring, I was upset. I was like, oh, I've got to do this term, and I've got to do this term. And I was getting so stressed, and I was thinking, I'm only with these children potentially an hour a week. I can't
Exactly.
get a whole curriculum in. I've just got to focus
No,
on
no.
the element that they're struggling with. Now you're also
I think that's it, isn't it? Is actually finding out what they need and then just working on that, because they, in the end, if they love you, which I'm sure they do, they want you to teach them everything, but you can't. You've got to be realistic, haven't you?
Definitely. So you're also and I hope I say this right, oracy leader. What is
Oracy, yeah. So oracy in the classroom, and funny enough, that was something I did in my PGCE. It's one of the topics I chose to write about for my assignment. The importance of learning through talking, or learning to talk, and using oracy in the classroom. So when I was knew I was leaving, I'd taken part in I'd helped some students to take part in a debating competition run by ESU, who is the organisation I work for, and that's the English Speaking Union. So it's a charity. I think it was set up by a friend of Winston Churchill. So it's a very long tradition of debating and public speaking. And it's all about giving children their voice, giving them confidence to communicate, to become good listeners, but also, good speakers, develop arguments. You can see how this helps with other subjects as well, particularly English and RE and history and those kind of things. So it's a wonderful job, and I only do maybe one gig a month, I guess. I've just been up to Oxford to deliver a workshop to a group of, I think they're 16 to 17-year-olds, and they were doing some course from all over the world. They were doing some course on climate change. They were like the climate innovators or whatever they were called, and it was teaching them to debate, or giving them some more information about debating. But that could be as young as primary. One of my favourite ones that I did recently was going to Peckham in South London and running a public speaking workshop for them. It's absolutely fantastic. There is no prep work. It's all provided for you. You go in and deliver. There's no marking afterwards. There's always a classroom teacher there if you need them. And I always get them involved, actually, because they can help with giving children feedback as they're preparing their speeches, because they usually do each person does a little talk at the end of it, some kind. And it's great because I love working in a classroom, and they've chosen ex-teachers because they found that no one else could deal with the behavior. So all the kind of lofty academics that probably are very good at debating just couldn't hack it. They couldn't cope with some of the issues that you get in a classroom. But honestly, you just go in there, you're as bouncy as possible to give them some confidence, and you say, well, everyone's going to be speaking by the end of this, and you kind of have to challenge them a little bit and just make it fun, because obviously it's a day off, whatever they were supposed to be doing. And by the end of it, everyone would have said their little bit. They'll have taken part in a debate, or they'll have done a short speech on something that's important to them. And I absolutely love that, because it's my way of staying in touch with schools as well. I've gone all around the country doing these things, lots of different school settings, from very kind of very posh to just lovely, ordinary, schools in the middle of a very built up city or whatever. And I love finding out also about how the teachers are, what the ethos of the school is. And I have to say the primary teachers are usually the happiest out of the teachers I meet. I think a lot of the secondary teachers are surreptitiously trying to do marking whilst the session's going on, whereas they're supposed to be really helping with the session. You find them kind of, what are they doing?
It's understandable. They just want any moment where they can just.
It's like, oh, good, I can get some marking done. Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating also finding out the ethos of the school, particularly in terms of discipline and stuff. I went to one school where they were obviously had this, what would they call it? Slant. I think it's, sitting and listening and, having your arms folded and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not my thing. And I remember one teacher coming in and trying to get them to do this, sit up straight, whatever. And I said to him, I'm fine, thanks. You know, I want them to move around and I want them to relax a bit. They don't have to sit up straight and fold their arms. You know, it's really not necessary. So it's quite fun being like an outsider coming in. But you know, teachers are teachers. So, you know, I really enjoyed that interaction.
Well, just before we finish off, I've got two more questions. The first being, for anyone that is looking to quit teaching, move on, what would you say your advice would be for that?
Well, it's one of the reasons I'm writing my book, actually. There is life after teaching. You don't have to give up teaching altogether, actually. There are so many transferable skills that you have as a teacher, either to teach in a different capacity or use those skills and go on and do something totally different. So I've interviewed, for the book, I interviewed teachers who, you know, have always been teachers, don't want to leave, but have some really good advice. So that would be to kind of stay and thrive, I guess. I've also interviewed teachers who have left and are talking from the other side. You know, they are able to kind of say what has changed for them and what they do now. And I think I hope is going to be very inspiring for people to read, because I do think there's that awful period, which I remember, where it's going round and round in your head. What do I do? Should I stay or should I go? It's like the Clash song, if you know that. Yeah. And I've done that as a, you know, I've done a little song heading under each of the titles. So I think it's really helpful just to know there are other people out there, because there aren't usually HR departments in schools, and it's very difficult to confide in someone if you're having these doubts or having these feelings about maybe leaving altogether without someone judging you. Either because they're jealous because they'd like to leave too, but they don't feel they can financially, or, you know. So my advice is, you need to take some time to think about it. And you need also possibly to have a conversation with someone who's not going to judge you. One of the things I want to do alongside the book, because I'm trained as a coach as well, is to coach teachers, to let them tell their story. Because some of them are still quite traumatized by what's happened to them in the course of their profession, this profession they poured everything into, you know. Sometimes people just need to tell their story, and they need a kind of neutral sounding board just to come to their own decision. You know, I wouldn't presume to say to someone, this is what you should do, but I would certainly help them arrive at that decision in a safe place, with a kind of clearer mind about it. And, you know, I think that's really, really helpful. And it's quite difficult to find, because you probably found the same thing. My partner was, you know, he was quite supportive of me leaving, but he was also worried about how that would affect us financially. And, you know, everyone has their own agenda. If they know you or they work with you, whatever, you really need to be able to step outside of that and think, what's right for me? Because you know yourself best. But if you're in that cloud of exhaustion and depression and anxiety and whatever that I think a lot of teachers end up in, it's really, really hard to think clearly, you know. So you need a space, like a beat of time, where you can step right out, throw everything up in the air and think, well, maybe you do want to stay. Perhaps you just need to change schools, or maybe you just need to have a different approach. And perhaps you can, you know, take some of the advice that certainly, you know, I was able to glean. And, you know, you might have someone you can talk to, a trusted mentor or something. And maybe that will mean you need to leave altogether, maybe get out of teaching and do tutoring, because you already have this wonderful qualification. I mean, I try not to regret having done my PGCE so late and put so much energy into it, because I am now a qualified teacher, and that means I will always be able to get work if I wanted it. I don't want to do cover. I mean, the joy of setting cover lessons is something I'm very happy to relegate to the bin now, you know, and let alone covering lessons. But there are lots of options whilst you decide what you want to do as well. That's the other thing to remember. You know, there are lots of things you can do temporarily to kind of feel it out and think, well, actually, that would suit me really well, or I'd really enjoy doing that. But it might be outside of teaching completely. Tutoring is always a great idea. and also working out what kind of tutoring you want to do, because, you know, I don't know, do you normally teach online?
I teach
Or do you
online. I did do face to face, but now I am purely online. And that takes a journey, you know, you have to go on a journey with that yourself, because like you've
Absolutely.
mentioned, there's alternative education you can tutor with. There's you know, all different types of companies you can
Absolutely.
work with, and but you have to find what works for you and what suits your lifestyle. And
Absolutely.
it's like, because I've been doing it 4 years now, and that was with supply originally in the beginning.
Yes.
And mentally, it takes a while, because I was at, when I initially thought of leaving, what you were saying, not many people did it. It wasn't the go-to. People didn't leave; they just stayed in their job until
Yeah.
they're tired. And so
Yeah.
you are in that type of setting where you're going against the grain, and it's
Absolutely. And
very,
you're
very
regarded as a bit
hard.
of a traitor, I think, when you know,
Yeah,
when you leave.
exactly. As soon, because the amount
Yeah.
of people I've read about online or have spoken to, as soon as people know there is that, and it might be meant, but it might not be meant. It's just that resentment you feel from others. You're leaving it all to us now. But there is
Yes,
such a
exactly.
point where you think, because I think everyone gets to that point, and it was for me when another colleague left, and I felt really jealous, and I thought, that's it now, I've got to go. um
Yes.
I not that I felt um like that person shouldn't. They were an incredible teacher, absolutely incredible, but I thought, if that person is leaving, that shows the state that the school's in, because I never thought that person would go.
Yeah,
But it
exactly.
kind of allowed me to be like, yes, I can take a chance for myself and I'll see what happens. And I still carried on teaching for a bit after that. I was in a different school, lovely school, but it kind of started the,
It was start you on your path. And I do think that there are teachers who absolutely thrive even under the current conditions. It's just that I'm not that kind of teacher. So it also
yeah, there's
depends what
loads
kind
of
of
people
teacher
that
you
love
are.
it, excited to go back, but it's
Yes.
just having options. And you can go back to it. You don't have to like
No,
totally,
that's right.
you can
It's not
totally
a
go back.
it's not a
Um,
forever decision. One of
no.
my teachers that I spoke to was saying, well, it's not a forever decision. You could always decide to go back. We tend to have this kind of catastrophic thinking when we're in that horrible state I was talking about.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be, but I do think it's really important that you give yourself the freedom of choice, because sometimes it feels like an obligation you can't get away from. And I think it's peculiar to teaching that, actually. I think it's the kind of like fight the good fight, you've got to carry on, you know.
Mm.
And it doesn't mean to say you're not a good teacher if you want to
No,
leave either.
no.
You know, certainly most of the people I talk to who've left teaching, they would say their teaching has improved since they left, because they now understand what their skills are. They get the feedback, they get to see the results that they are able to help people achieve, and
Mm.
they're able to develop themselves because they have the time and the space to do it. They're able to develop certain aspects of their teaching and specialize, which is always going to be better for the student, isn't it? You know, because what you're doing is you're saying, well, my specialty is this. You know, in my case, I do a little bit of coaching as I teach as well, particularly with the anxious ones, you know. So my thing is about building confidence and giving them exam strategies. Because a lot of the less able students, much as you would love to spend a long time and enthuse them about literature and whatever, I specialize in language because that's the key thing for them. And I talk to them about their exam techniques and, you know, things that they need to avoid, things that they need to include. And yes, it's quite prescriptive, but actually for a lot of, particularly the resit students, that's what they need. They need someone to say, right, you know, we've got to get you used to the timings, we've got to get used to doing practice, you know, you always need to look for that. It would help if you mentioned this, you know, whatever. And what I find is that it gives them the confidence so that they don't get into the exam and then think, oh, I don't know what to do. They think, oh, hang on a minute, I know what to do. I do this question first, then I do that question, and I've got to remember those three things. And, you know, for some teachers, if you think, oh, that's terrible, you know, but actually, you know, you're developing,
It
I
used to be
suppose, what
known as
people
tips
need.
and tricks that they used to teach you just to give you a head
Yes,
start, really.
absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And so just to finish off, it's been lovely
Yeah.
talking to you. I've learned so
Oh,
much.
lovely to speak to you.
But where can we find you and what are you currently offering?
So what I'm currently offering is I have literally just completed the first draft of my book,
Oh,
which is
lovely.
called Kind Words for Tired Teachers. You can find me on LinkedIn or on Facebook. So Vivienne Smith, Vivienne, because it's a funniness spelling of Vivienne. I will be offering, or I am already offering, coaching for teachers alongside offering this book, because I discovered that I could have really done. In fact, I did look for a kind of a coach or something like a mentor when I was making my decision, and so now I feel that I'd like to offer that to teachers because no one else needs to know, and it's a journey that they can undertake, but get a little bit of help along the way and like a sounding board. So really just people need to contact me, and I always offer a free conversation first of all to see whether that would be a good fit for them. But certainly look out for my book, because I hope to have it published by the middle of October. We'll see how I go with that.
Oh, that
So
sounds
yeah,
lovely. Well, I'll leave all your details down below. So if anyone wants to get in touch, they can, and obviously to find your
thank you
book,
so
that would
much.
be lovely. But thank you once again. It's been an absolute treat, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat to me.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks, Jenna.
Thank you. Well, if you liked today's video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see who else I'm chatting to, and make sure to check out the details down below.